Hello, hello, and welcome to yet another exclusive YGD Masterclass. I'm Elle, Osili-Wood, your host for today's session, and this is going to be a good one. I know this is one of the favourite panels that happens every year, programming. We're going to be talking about the back end of games. We're diving into the technical know-how that make the games you know and love. And we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers for you today who all work in different areas so we can get a really clear overview of what it looks like to be a programmer in games. I want to say a really big thank you to our incredible partners. YGD is only made possible because of their support. So a big list of shout outs to Creative Assembly, Criterion, King, PlayStation, Tencent Games, Ubisoft, Warner Brothers Games, and Wizards of the Coast. They're all fantastic. Like I said, we couldn't do this without them. So a huge thank you to them. And a preemptive thank you to our fantastic panelists. I'm very excited to have them here. So let's kick things off. I'm going to get them to introduce themselves, starting off with Mikaela.
Hi, I'm Mikaela. I work as I'm a senior UI programmer at Creative Assembly, working on the Total War series. So yeah, that's me.
So excited to have you here. Nikky, tell us all about you.
Hello, my name's Nikky. I'm the lead programmer at Silver Games. I've only been there a little time, and before that, I worked at Ubisoft.
Fantastic. And finally, Luke.
Hello, I'm Luke, and I'm a senior gameplay programmer at PlayStation London Studio. I've worked on Blood and Truth, and in the past, I've also worked at Sumo Digital on the Little Big Planet franchise.
Fantastic. Well, as I said, we've got a real mix of experience there, a mix of titles, a mix of job titles. So let's dive in to what each of those really means. So Luke, I'm going to come straight back to you. Tell me what your job actually is. What do you do when it comes to the design of a game?
So as a gameplay programmer, I generally take ideas from our designers, contribute to them, try and work out something that I'm happy to go ahead and implement, have a nice little back and forth, decide on something, then I scurry away, do a load of programming to get the player to do interesting things or to make the game do interesting things. And then I show that back to our designers and we work out if they're happy with it.
Fantastic. I like that. That's a very clear overview. I love your description of that. I'm sure you're not just, stealing ideas and scurrying away. I'm sure there's more to it, but yeah. That sounds great. Mikaela, tell me about, the specifics of how your role fits into a game design plan.
So as a UI programmer, we work very much with everyone. So, we basically closely work with the UI artists that, we need to make their vision come through, but also we need to make sure that the designer's vision come through and the UX designer's visions, because obviously we need to make sure that people understand how to play our game. And, Total War is a really complicated game and everything happens through the UI. But then we also obviously work with all the gameplay programmers to make sure that, all the functionality that we interact with is there. And also audio is something we need to think about all the time because, UI often have sounds. So essentially what I do is basically I'm the glue that keeps everything together and just, talk to everyone, make sure that everything, that everyone's vision has come through essentially. And that the game is playable, really.
Just for anybody watching who perhaps doesn't know what UI is or what UI means, could you just give us, I know it's a big, UI and UX have a lot of explanations, but just a brief one.
So the UI is essentially the user interface. So it's essentially like anything that you click, anything that provides you information. So any text, that's also a thing, localization, which is, translating text. So anything that the user can interact with, we essentially make, especially on a strategy game. So obviously there's various levels of UI on different games. And then UX is the user experience. So that's essentially how the player experience the gameplay, or how the interaction with the gameplay, essentially.
Yeah, and as you said, Total War is kind of the deep end for that, isn't it? I can't think of something where both the UI and the UX are more important, but thank you for that. That was a really fantastic explanation. And then Nikki, tell me about your role. What does your role look like?
So I'm the lead programmer. So I manage a team of currently 2 programmers, so quite a small team. So my job is kind of 50% programming. So that might be gameplay, or it might be tools, or it might be DevOps. So I get to do a bit of everything, which is really fun. Every day is different. I really like that. But the other 50% of my time is mentoring, so helping my team to grow, and making sure that they're able to be the best at their jobs that they can be. And also chatting with the other teams, so chatting with the leads of the other disciplines and the members of the other teams to make sure that we're scheduling the work in a sensible order, to make sure that my team is not blocking another team, and to make sure that, like, communicating if we're blocked by another team. So it's my job to kind of keep everybody's ducks in a row so that we can ship the game sort of in an efficient way, and without all those nasty things like overtime.
I mean, Nikki, you said every day is different, and I'm sure that it is, but can you give us an overview of perhaps what a week looks like, or what your to-do list perhaps looks like in a role like yours?
Yeah, absolutely. So some things that I've done recently, we upgraded the engine from we're working in Unreal, so we upgraded from 4.26 to 4.27. So I was responsible for writing. We have an internal tool which is responsible for getting everybody the code, getting everybody all the tools that they need. So anybody that's maybe less technical can just go in there, click a button, and they've got everything they need. And so I wrote the code in there so that people could download the new engine, and then I supported people through that. So if they had problems with it, I was on call to sort of help them out. I also do people's code reviews, so they will send me their code, and that I'm responsible for kind of helping them to learn. That process is really a learning process. So making sure that if they've written the code and I'm like, oh, have you heard about this thing? You can actually use this bit of functionality, and you'll be able to do it like in a much cooler way. So that's like teaching, and I really, really like that. And sometimes it's adding features into the game, so a similar thing to what Luke is doing. So I might be adding in a new ability or a new enemy or something like that. And one thing I did this week was I built a Slack bot. So I built a tool that integrated with our team's Slack so that we could be a bit more efficient in that way as well. So look, just loads of different stuff.
I love that. Really, really varied. Mikaela, for you, how varied is your role? What does a day or a week look like for you?
Because we're such a massive studio and we have really big teams, as a UI programmer at Creative Assembly and Total War specifically, you're not just looking at UI, you're actually like looking at the whole code base, and often like bugs will be passed to us, and we'll have to make sure that, because people notice bugs in the UI, it might not be the UI's problem, it might be a different area that's causing an issue, but people see it and they go, oh, this is for you. And then we'll have to ensure that, it's not the UI breaking. We have to make sure that, figure out where is the problem. And then if we can't solve it ourselves, we'll have to pass it to the team, which, where the problem is occurring. I don't do so much programming anymore because I'm obviously moved to a position where I'm often in meetings talking to people and making sure that everything is working fine in the project and that we're actually on track, and that, and also supporting our other team members, that are, that need help. So it's very similar. Like we have to do a lot of code reviews. Reading code, that's a massive thing in just programming in general. Like that's just a lot of it is investigating, very little coding.
I think one of the things that we always hear in these panels is there's always less coding than you think and a lot more meetings. I think it's something that we hear again and again, that obviously because game design is so collaborative, you do have to spend a lot of time talking to other people. So yeah, that's something we hear a lot. Luke, how much time are you spending in meetings? What does a day or a week look like for you?
Lately, in quite a lot of meetings, but that's just due to where my current project is. But in other times, it's been again, it depends on like where you are in a project. There are phases of a project where you're doing a lot more programming and a lot more work than meetings, and then there's parts of the project where you're doing a lot more meetings than programming. So, for example, like back on Blood and Truth, I was specialized, like Mikaela pointed out, you tend to specialize in a bit, but I was specializing on the player player-facing gameplay. I was in charge of, because we were a VR game, I was in charge of the players' hands and what they could grab onto and how they could interact with objects in the world. So I would have a word with design, and they would say, we want this object to behave like this when you grab onto it. And then I would go away and implement that and make sure it all works within that system, because it's like a mini system, like looking for all the different objects you can grab. And then when you grab onto them, handling how they behave and everything. And I would try and work out if this needed any new functionality or not. And if it did, I would then implement it and take it back to them, and they'd have a look at it, have a play with it, give me some feedback. And then we'd keep going back and forth until we got to a result they were happy with.
All of you have said, you have to interact with other sections, it is about working together. So how much, I'm interested in the process. So when an idea, a feature, an element of the game comes together, who has the final say? If programming says we can't do that because of this, and then art really wants it to look like this, and the UI is saying, well, the player experience will be impacted if we don't do this. How does that all come together? How do you end up with the finished piece that does go in, trying to keep everybody happy?
Like with anything, it's a compromise, and you end up having to repeatedly have meetings about this same thing over and over again, trying to it's like a huge tug of war, except with 5 different ropes attached together and everyone's tugging at the same time. And it keeps going around, you keep trying different things. Of course, like every team has their own hard lines. So for example, as a programmer, we would say, no, you can't do this because it's too complicated. It would take too long for the computer to work out. You can't have that, something so complicated. And art similarly will probably have similar hardline requirements of, no, it can't look that ugly. It needs to look beautiful so our players enjoy it. But it's really a really long back and forth trying to find that ground where everyone is happy with it.
So we've had a look at how you work collaboratively. We've heard about all the meetings. We've heard about all the ways that you make compromises and work with people. But now we're getting a little bit selfish and a little bit personal. So Nikky, I'm going to come straight back to you. I want to hear about your personal creative process. So what does, if you're implementing something new, or you've just got a new idea that you personally want to work on, what does your process look like?
Okay, great question. I like to start on paper. Which probably doesn't sound, I don't know whether that sounds kind of conventional for a programmer, but I like to start on paper. I think best with a pen. And so I like to try and design what I want it to do, or I might draw a flow chart, like these are the states that I want. And then I will usually move to Excel, and I will start writing out the behaviors of what I want. So I will say, okay, I'm in this situation, and then I want to click this button, and then this is what I want to happen. And I'll try and get in my head, essentially these are like little test cases. If this is what I want, the thing that I want to build, this is what I want it to do. And then I will move into the code. So I really want to experiment somewhere that feels like lower risk, I guess. So on paper or in like a spreadsheet, and then I can move to the code. And then usually I will whack up the absolute worst code you've ever seen, because I just want to get the idea down, and I just want to build it, and it will be absolutely terrible. I would never pass my own code review. Like I can see all of the comments that I would leave on my own code. But I like that, because sometimes your brain is moving so fast that you just want to build the thing, and you don't want to think about good software architecture, and you don't want to think about this is probably a performance problem. And then I'll do a second pass and I'll build it nicely, and I'll have learned things from the first pass that I probably hadn't thought of before. So I might have thought that I definitely wanted to implement it using this design pattern. And then when I built the first pass, I'll be like, no, Nikky, of course, that's not going to work. You have to do it in this way. And so I'll learn a lot from the first pass.
Hopefully everybody's thinking, oh, this is the job for me. Hopefully they've, all our audience watching can't wait to get started. So let's talk a little bit about how each of you got to where you are today. So Mikaela, I'll come back to you to begin with. Tell me about your journey. Where did you start? When did you know this is what you wanted to do? And how did you get where you are today?
Yeah, so interestingly, I went to uni quite late in my life, I think, comparatively to my friends anyway. So I was actually a taxi driver for a couple of years before I realized that actually I want to go to uni and I want to do programming. But I'd studied software engineering at university, and I learned kind of game programming on the side, because it wasn't a specific game course. So we were doing a lot of telecommunication and vehicle simulation in my software engineering course, because we were right next to Ericsson and Volvo. So that's kind of how that started. And I started making my own games because I was really into, games in general. yeah, when I finished uni, I started working at a at Ericsson telecommunication company, which is completely opposite to UI. Like that's this back end you can get. And then I realized as I was there, actually, this is not what I want to do. I want to see I want to be able to visualize what I'm creating, and I want to be able to see it, not just knowing that it's in a box somewhere. So yeah, I moved to the UK because I'm originally from Sweden, and I applied to Creative Assembly as a UI programmer, and yeah, that's how I got into this.
Okay, I mean, I feel like now the pressure's on for some really interesting jobs, but Nikky, tell me about your route into the role that you have now.
Listen, I'm not going to disappoint you. So I'm Australian. I'm from a place called Adelaide, which is a capital city. It's reasonably small though. And there was, like Mikaela was saying, there was no like specific games course at the time. So I have a Bachelor of Computer Science in Software Engineering and Pure Mathematics. And I couldn't really see, I always wanted to make video games, like since I was 8. That's when my dad first was like teaching me how to write code and playing like Doom with me when I was 8. But I couldn't really see a route in, like this is a long time ago now. So there wasn't anything like young game designers at the time that I could join, or a games course at my uni, so I couldn't really see a way like in. So I just kind of like followed my friends from my university, and Australia has reasonably big industry of writing software for the mining industry. So I worked for 2 different companies making process improvement software for the mining industry. So my first one was drill and blast software. So we wrote algorithms to basically make sure that you didn't put explosives in the wrong place. So you would make sure you didn't put the wrong explosives in like the wet holes. You had to use the wet explosives and to maximize your yield from the coal seam. And then the second place that I worked was a company that made mining simulation software. So kind of like a flight simulator where you would have the cockpit of a plane, and then you would learn how to fly the plane from there. It was like that, but for heavy machinery. So trucks, big haul trucks and cranes and drills and underground loaders and all sorts of things like excavators, things like that. And that was a really interesting job because we were essentially building a video game. But a very serious video game, obviously, that was used in the real world to teach people how to drive these machinery, and you had to pass the simulator training before they'd let you in the real machines, because they're quite dangerous, like as big as a house. But we built essentially what I know now was our own game engine to do that. And I wrote AI for the mining trucks. I wrote AI for the autonomous mining truck simulation. And then I applied for a job at Ubisoft, because I was like, Nikky, you're getting old and you always wanted to do this. So like, let's do it. So I applied for a job at Ubisoft, and Ubisoft Reflections in Newcastle has a long history of doing vehicles. So they did Driver San Francisco and driver games like that. And so I was interviewed by somebody that quizzed me about vehicle AI, which is something that I knew a lot about. And they hired me and they shipped me out with my dog from Australia. And yeah, the rest is history.
Oh God, I mean, come on, you completely nailed it. That's such a good job. And I love, again, that lots of people think that you have to start out in game design. And we've learned here from 2 brilliant examples that these skills are totally transferable. You can do something that doesn't sound like games at all, and secretly it is games. Those skills are there. Yeah, that is absolutely fantastic. Well, Luke, I mean, the pressure is really on now. What's your story? It better have like astronaut at the beginning.
I don't think I can live up to that pressure. I'd quite like a straightforward line into this job, unfortunately. Like Nikky, I've always known I wanted to work in games. Ever since I can't even remember, like a really young kid. And that led to me, like in my early teens, just downloading Game Maker and just trying my own little things within that. And from there, I've just slowly worked through school, then college, and then got into university in Sheffield, doing a game software development course. I got quite lucky that I managed to get a placement year at Sumo, and they just dropped me on Little Big Planet. It was like taking this little fish and dropping me in a big pool of water. I felt a bit lost for a little bit, but managed to get my footing eventually. And that's kind of history. I did go back to uni and finish, but Sumo took me straight back afterwards because they were happy with me, I guess. And then eventually I moved down to London to work with PlayStation.
Let's start talking about, if somebody's watching this now and they're thinking, okay, I also want to work at PlayStation. I want to do what Luke does. What are your tips for them? And bearing in mind, you know, our young people watching are kind of 10 to 18. So we're talking very, very first steps. What should they be doing?
We're really lucky in that now that there's like a lot of really powerful and easy to use like game engines or game development tools out there that you can just kind of download for free and try them out. There's a lot of assets available and a lot of videos on YouTube that kind of walk you through how to do these things. So I really just recommend that people have a play, see what they like, what aspect they like of game development, and go from there.
You know, if you have a group of friends and you're all like making a game together, or if you're making a game separately, just reading code and understanding what other people are doing and why they're doing it, you've gone a long way to be able to program and knowing that you're doing, you know, what you're doing. Essentially, like that's a big part of our jobs as well, is just being able to read these like 20-year legacy code that someone wrote, you know, that you might not necessarily agree with what they're doing.
You know, if you want to be a programmer, maybe progress outside of games and maybe learn like a web development language and or a language for building tools, and try and see if you can build a tool to help you build your game. So I think that's been really helpful for me. I think that last account, I can technically read, not necessarily code in, but I can technically read 14 languages. And that's stuff that like I didn't learn. I learned a completely dead language at university. But that's through like, oh, I want to build this thing, and the way that I build that, like I want to build an app for my phone, and the way that I build that is to learn this language called Kotlin. So I'm going to go and learn that. And I'm going to build an app for my phone, and that's what I'm going to do this weekend. And yeah, just like not being afraid to jump into something new. I think removing that fear of like is a really big thing.
So Nikky, I wanted to come straight back to you actually and say, if you could recommend just 1 or 2 languages that would be a good starting place for, again, our kind of 10 to 18-year-olds, what would you recommend?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it depends on what you want to do, because I think also there's a lot of different definitions of what programming is, and I kind of allow all of them. So if you're at the point where you want to be using Scratch, which is drag and drop, that is as much programming as writing like embedded C or straight onto like the chip of whatever it is that you're programming. If you wanted to start something low entry, but that maybe isn't only for games, I would start with something like Python, because it doesn't have to be compiled. It doesn't have to be like, it's C++ is what we use in Unreal, and that is a big, heavy language, and it takes ages to set up. And it took me 4 hours to get a compiler set up on my computer, and I've been doing this for 15 years. But Python comes with Windows. You can just boot it up and be coding in 2 seconds. So potentially a language like that, or you know, whatever comes with, if you want to be using Unity, you're going to be learning C#. So really, I think my answer is just get started. It doesn't really matter. Just learn the first language, learn like how logic flows and how you construct a program. Yeah, I think that's a good place.
Yeah, no, that's really lovely advice, really helpful. I think a lot less intimidating than perhaps it can be to sometimes look and just see, you know, 100 languages.
Yes,
that you
immediately start with pointers and memory management. Like, no, don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as someone, who did immediately start with C++, mistake. Python. No. That's my favorite thing now. So yeah. Right. Let's take a look at our Q&A. Oh my goodness! Wait, we've got a dog on the screen, Nikky. There's a dog here. We'll just quickly come to you, Nikky. Please introduce.
This is Growlithe. He's my little Pokemon. He's very sleepy.
Adorable.
Yeah, he is.
Oh, okay. I'm very, very glad Growlithe is here. I'll try and come up with some questions for Growlithe later. But first of all, we're going to ask an anonymous question. How do you optimize code and games for wider ranges of hardware specifications?
So I'll take this one if no one minds. What we usually do is we try and work out what the lowest end hardware that we're willing to support is. So if we were making something for the PS4, Xbox One and the Switch, we would say, right, the Switch is clearly the weakest of this set. And then we would always test our code on the Switch and test the performance and make sure that we're within like an acceptable performance range there. Basically keep a tab on that like lowest end hardware that we're allowing for to make sure that the experience is acceptable on that console.
I've got quite a specific question, which might touch on some of the kind of discussions we've already had, but Max Starus, hopefully I've said that correctly, said they're currently using C# with WinForms or Unity, and they're not really sure where they should move on from there. They're really interested in game AI and neural networks too. So do you have any suggestions on what they should be doing next?
That is a really great question. I guess it depends on what they mean by game AI. So if it's game AI, because there's two sort of very separate schools of AI. So there's the AI in terms of like I'm playing my game and I enter the enemy's vision and the enemy spots me, and then they're going to do X behavior, or they're going to choose which attack to use, or however that works. Like that's one sort of type of AI. And you could 100% experiment with building that within Unity using C#. There is a really good YouTube channel called AI in Games, and he has a 101 series which teach you about behavior trees and state machines and about goal-oriented action planning and all the different types of game AI that you can use. So I would definitely recommend that YouTube channel. And he also does deep dives into games and how their AI, like breaks down how their AI works and what design patterns they used to build that AI. So that would be a good place to start. If he's talking about neural networks, so if he means sort of like machine learning and different types of AI, that is sort of less related to games, but there's also some really interesting GDC talks where they've maybe used machine learning to like test a game. So they've taught a bot to play the game, and that has been their automated testing. And so potentially a good place to start is by learning what other people have done in their games, and then trying to see where you might apply that at the level that you're at with the skills and the engines you have available to you at the moment. I don't know, is that a good answer?
That was an excellent answer. That was like perfect. It was such a specific question. I was worried you wouldn't be able to do it justice, but yeah, I think that was absolutely fantastic. Now, the next question I think I will throw to everybody. So Mikaela, I'm going to start with you, giving you a little bit of preemptive warning there. If you are creating a portfolio, what should they be putting in a portfolio, and what are you looking to learn from somebody's portfolio? What makes a great portfolio?
One thing I think is quite important when you put stuff on so that we can see it, is that you, before you send your CV away or whatever, or before you decide that you're going to apply for a job, that you actually maintain your portfolio, so that anything you put in code that we are going to be reading, you can kind of defend why you did it that way, or not like defend. It's not like an attack. It's just basically like you want to show off your best skills. And if you have 10-year-old code or 5-year-old code that you wrote when you were much younger and didn't have as much experience, people will look at that code, if you have it in your portfolio, and they're going to go, wait, why did he do it that way? That doesn't seem very modern, or like that doesn't sound like he knows about this concept yet. But you might do, it's just that you haven't maintained the code that you're sending us. So I think keeping your code up to date is a very important thing, because you want to show off your best self, right?
Luke, for you, what's the key element of a great portfolio?
I would say to like showcase something that you're particularly proud of. Like if in any of your projects or anything, if there was like a particular problem within that was maybe complicated, or you had a really nice solution to that you're proud of, just to make sure to highlight what you encountered, why it was particularly challenging, and how you fixed it, or how you solved it, or made something. And if you like really showcase those like interesting cases, then that gives us like an insight to how you solve problems, how you make things, and that's really useful for us to hear.
Make sure that your portfolio reflects the job that you're applying for. So if your portfolio is full of games, and if I dig into that, your builder's game designer, and you didn't actually write the code, then that's not reflective of what, like, the role that you're applying for. And yeah, just if it says that C#, like absolutely show me some C# code, like back up that you do know your C#. Again, I don't mind which language you know, but like if you've said you know a language, show me some code. I would rather just have a link to a GitHub page than a flashy portfolio where you hadn't actually written like maybe the code for those projects. Yeah, I have opinions about portfolios for programmers, because I think that sometimes we get really bogged down into the flashy bits, and we try and be like jacks of all trades, and we try and learn how to do the art, and we learn how to do the music, and we learn how to do the game design. and actually the code knowledge falls by the wayside a little bit. So yeah, if in doubt, please just send me a link to your GitHub.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, that was really, really great advice, and I think a wonderful place to finish. Go out, work on your portfolios. We know that you're all brilliant. That's why you're here. So get them looking fantastic and use the tips that you just heard there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope that you found it as useful as I did. I genuinely loved it. I feel like I've got so much great advice from our fantastic panelists. And of course, a huge thank you again to our wonderful partners, but mostly a massive thank you to our brilliant panelists, Luke, Nikki and Mikaela. Thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.